We are now recording. Thank you. Tonight is question of Urban Chat has been in business for 12 years, talking about housing, etc., transportation. And I think we've made something of a difference in the community. So the question we wanted to answer, and we've done the research coming into tonight, and we think we're pretty comfortable in our answer, is does the general plan reflect the fact that Urban Chat has been here for a dozen years? Did I not say that well? Okay. Well, we will try to answer that question as we go along, but then it's also just the opportunity to talk about what is the land use framework. And for those who are new to the process, the consultant and city planning have put together a number of frameworks, which are sort of overall statements of intentions in various areas: economic development, transportation, land use being the biggest one, that once those have been honed a little bit and review comments received, that will all be converted into general plan elements being the name for chapters in the general plan. So there will be one more overall rechurning of the data, but this is a chance to look at land use as a set aside. Oh, the mayor just walked in. Don't tell him I made fun of him earlier. Please don't. This will be sort of a chance to look at land use as one consolidated whole. Now, just so I know, how many folks have read the entire land use framework, all 124 pages? That's pretty much the three I thought would raise their hand. Can I believe you, Kevin, on that one? Okay. With that, let's start the PowerPoint. Sharon and I are going to toss the mic back and forth a little bit. Eventually, both Sharon and Heather will have joined me up here. But let me talk through some of these slides just to get us going. That's our overall mission statement. We adopted that in 2017 and haven't changed it at all. Sort of proud of that. We got it right the first time. Next slide. Housing. We don't have enough. We need a lot more. And when we say a lot more, we are not an affordable housing advocate. We think there's a need at all levels of demographics. I'm 71 years old. I have a wife with MS. I live in a 3-story house. That's not sustainable. I want a 1,200 square foot condo downtown in a flat. That doesn't exist. So we end up pushing for a lot of things. Now, I'm not selfish enough to just push for that, but I'm just saying there are a lot of other reasons for housing other than just affordable housing. Next one. Must build our cities for people, not cars. Always been a climate motivation to get there, but it's more than that. If you build a place, it's one of the great things about urban planning. If you build a city that an 8-year-old and an 80-year-old feel comfortable traversing, you've built a city everyone's comfortable in. And bottom line is 8-year-olds don't, and probably 80-year-olds shouldn't be driving cars. So if we are going to make an 880 city, it needs to be not car free. It's not a war on cars, but we need enough alternatives to get by with far fewer cars than we use today. Transit, biking, walking, 15-minute neighborhoods, which we will talk about this evening, are all part of that. Next slide. When you sprawl and have quarter-acre lots, you have lots of water and sewer serving only a few homes. The numbers just don't work out. That's very much where Strong Towns, who you've all heard from before, comes down. Is you can sustain sprawl for the first 50 years, and then the tax revenue isn't enough and things start to collapse. And we are probably better off than many cities because we haven't sprawled as badly as some, but there are some cities out there that I don't know where they're going to be 25 years from now. So we need infill instead of sprawling. And the last, oh, that's right, not the last. Climate action. We've talked about getting away from cars, walkable neighborhoods, so we don't even need to hop on a bus. And then, of course, buildings are a major source of GHG also, but they're not part of our mission. So we definitely want the architects in the room to do better jobs in the future, but we won't hammer you on it. That's not our mission. And now we probably get to one more slide. Oh, we don't have the last one. I thought we did. Actually, there's one mission pillar there that isn't there, which is municipal financial sustainability. Did I miss it? Oh, you're right. Okay, it was part of that. Okay, yeah. The reason, I don't know why I missed it. My apologies. But the reason we bring that up is because a poor city can't do the things we want. It can't do the climate action things we want. It can't rebuild the trestle. It's strapped getting by day to day, and that's just not where we want to be. Okay, my apologies to Sharon. She was smarter than me, which is often the case, almost always the case. So now we will try to compare the land use framework to our mission. I know I've seen these slides. I've already forgotten them. Okay, what's the framework? I already covered that earlier. This process has been underway for 3 years now. Extensive input. I know that's way too small for you to read. Take my word for it. I've served on the General Plan Advisory Committee since 2021. Sharon's been there with me. And there's just been a lot of data. I can claim I truly read the entire land use framework. I cannot claim I read every single document that's been generated for the general plan. Nobody could have. But there's a lot of great stuff online. I encourage anybody who's interested in specific topics, dig in. There's a lot of stuff there. Next. This is an overall summary of the framework as Sharon and I viewed it. It's in support of the UGB. We don't want to sprawl. We can't afford to sprawl. If we don't sprawl, if we maintain the UGB, the October 9 forum, then infill is the only possible way we can go. Some of that infill will be taller buildings. By the way, we're not using the word overlay anytime tonight except that one. Not only did I not want to do it, but I promised Heather earlier today we wouldn't do it. So, some will be taller buildings. Whether we're talking downtown or other sites like around the train stations, there will be taller buildings. Some of it will just be taking parcels that have been skipped thus far. I was not at the council meeting yesterday. I understand it was somewhat extended. Creekwood is an example. Again, not saying yay or nay, just saying that's the kind of infill we're going to be seeing, and it's generally a good thing. Less travel, again, supported by the framework, 15-minute city. And as we increase intensity of land uses and decrease in others, there are places we want to preserve, like the upper reach of the river. We're going to have zoning changes, and that's a lot of what the land use framework is about. Next slide. And the big reveal for the night, that's damn close to what the Urban Chat mission statement is about. Now, to be fair, before we spend too much time patting ourselves in the back, urban planning has gone this direction anyway. I attend the Congress for the New Urbanism most years, and as they often say, from being a rebel group 30 years ago, they have now become, if not quite the status quo, it's a lot closer to it. Nobody blinks anymore when you talk about walkable urbanism, whereas even 20 years ago, that was thought to be a communist plot. It probably is in a few states still, but yeah, don't tell Donald Trump I said, yeah, whatever. Okay, next slide. Yeah. I actually have the notes.
Yeah, but here they are.
I'm just not good about it. Yeah, you're right. I just have some good thoughts. I just forgot about them. The one mission pillar we don't touch is financial sustainability for the city. Just because that really isn't the goal of a general plan to talk about having a financially stable city hall. But if we do all the things the general plan and the land use framework talk about, we're going to get to a more financially sustainable city hall. So it works out in the wash, even if we don't specifically acknowledge that as a goal. One thing I've heard a lot in past years, and I'll get away from land planning for a minute, I'll talk about river protection, is how many times I've been told if the city had just done what was in the last general plan, our river would be in so much better shape today than it is. The response to that, and Heather, as much as anybody, has been the one to say this, is the city can't do everything in a general plan. Unless a developer makes an application for a piece of property along the river, there is no legal way to take a little bit of land from him and create the walkway, create the setback. It's just, the reality is between opportunities created by land use applications and between financial resources, there's only so much you can do. So after 10 years of listening to the river people complain to me about all the stuff that they wanted, it was in the last general plan, didn't get done, I now get to be that person going forward because of all the great urbanist things that I see in the land use framework and are not going to happen in the next 20 years because lack of land use applications, lack of developers who want to do what's called out, lack of city resources. So a general plan is guardrails. I think Ron Whitmore, who was the lead planner, talked about that a lot. It gives a big picture of what we don't want to go outside of, but it can't direct everything that happens inside because the city cannot make those things happen on their own. It takes developers willing to do it. It takes people wanting to live in those situations so developers know they can build a project and make it work. Markets are complicated things, so don't take the general plan as a roadmap. It's not, nothing but guardrails. And then the last thing, and this is the one place I'll be a little critical of the plan, but those who've sat through some of the GPAC meetings have heard me say this before. There are a lot of things here that feel too much like top-down planning. When I got into the 15-minute descriptions of the 15-minute town centers, neighborhood centers, and activation areas, it just felt like it was a really nice description of what planning in 2025 looks like. And I started thinking, what if we put all that into the zoning code and by 2040, the world has begun changing and it's no longer right and everybody's doing variance applications or overlays, I said it, damn, to comply. So it just, and we were talking earlier this evening about Jane Jacobs, and she was a big fan of not being overly restrictive, but given some outlines and then letting the world find a way to work with it in a way that works for them, works for the consumer. Let things grow organically. And for those who have participated in any strong town conversations, that is their mantra. That top-down planning is efficient but stupid, and bottom-up planning is inefficient but smart. And I don't agree with either extreme. I think we need something in the middle. So that's my comment. That's my one halfway critical comment regarding the land use framework. And Sharon, at some point, you're going to jump up here and take over from me, and trust me, I need it. And I'm going to pass out these handouts. I think you're doing fine, but I'll just offer some. I'm tossed under the bus again. Okay. Areas of change. We have a general plan from 20 years ago. It called out, and to be clear on terminology, general plans do not call out zoning. They call out land designations. So a general plan would designate an area as residential. A zoning code and a zoning map would then say, within that residential, this is going to be R1, this is going to be R3, that kind of thing. So I want to be cautious, and I'll to use the word land designation. But the old general plan had land designations. It had to. The entire city has to be designated as something or other. And this time, as we go through and look at how the world has changed in 20 years, a lot of those felt out of date. A lot of them had to be changed. And that's a lot of what the land use framework is about, is where those changes were. Because I had not expected to talk to these slides, and Sharon tossed me out here, I'm going to be a little clueless here, but let's go to the next slide. Well, okay, no, there's some good thoughts there. What we want to do now compared to 20 years ago, increased housing, increased businesses, near transit, near services, near 15-minute hubs. More opportunities to live with far less car miles or no car miles at all. And climate change is a much more real thing than it was in 2005. Start pulling back a little bit from areas we know will be inundated. I think by the end of the 21st century is sort of the extent of the projection we do in another element, another framework of the general plan. Um, and then also look at what some of the mitigation measures might be. Areas we don't want to lose to inundation, but we want to have the ability to, fill the land, create barriers, whatever. But that is going to be a long-term issue. And it's probably not even something we're going to deal with in the 20 years of this general plan, other than not building new housing in stupid places. But we want to lay the groundwork for, as sea level rise occurs, the next generation has some framework in place, some groundwork in place that they can build on. So we've left them the right building blocks. Got it? Eric, thank you. Bail me out.
And if you can
Sure.
put it on mic, please. We have a second mic even.
Okay.
Yes, I should have said that earlier. If anybody wants to interrupt me with questions, please do so. Great.
This is just a question because I'm new to land use frameworks. But you talked about like land designations as being something that this handles, and I was reading about that. But to what extent, to what detail does it get to? So for instance, if I'm somebody who would want to advocate for more flexible land use designation in, like, let's say R1, R2, R3, let's say I wanted micro enterprise kitchens. Like, is that something that gets to this level or not?
I would say micro enterprise kitchens probably not. I think,
It's a flavor of land use, right?
but I think where the zoning code is going to be updated at the same time that the general plan is being finalized. So a new zoning code will be adopted perhaps the same night by the council sometime late 2025. I think it's in the zoning code where you're going to see revisions to things like micro enterprise kitchen.
Yeah, well, just as an example, right?
It's a fun one.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
So ready.
Elizabeth.
Oh, not only me, but you can grab one of the seats.
Oh, I'm
There's
hungry.
three here for a reason. Do you want to be in the middle or on the end?
I guess the middle it is. Just in response to the micro enterprise kitchen ordinance, because that was at council last night, a presentation on that. So one of the areas that the general plan might address that is perhaps saying something, and this is what Katati did with their general plan in the residential land use designations. They said primarily residential with limited commercial. And so something like the micro enterprise home kitchen ordinance, thank you, would then fall within that. So it kind of gives that room for those type of things. So it's not going to be so specific necessarily, but, or you might have a policy in the land use framework that said something like, supporting additional home / commercial options for residents or something like that, something in a policy format too.
And that is why Heather is here. She
Yeah.
got it much more right than I did.
Well, and the reason I wanted to hop up here is because the thing that was interesting about the MICO, the micro enterprise home kitchen ordinance, is it is not subject to your zoning, but it is subject to your general plan. So that's kind of a nuance with that in particular, is it's not going to be something that necessarily is in our zoning ordinance because it's exempt from zoning regulations, but not general plan. Yeah. Yeah. So we do, to support those kind of evolutions in programs and policies, we may want to see our residential zoning districts have a little bit more wiggle room to allow us to do that while remaining consistent with our general plan.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there was such a proposed policy in the land use framework. Didn't call out micro enterprise home kitchens, but it did talk about preparing food for sale in the home. So, yeah, so it does seem appropriate there.
Great question. And Heather, thank you for being here. Judith.
I'm sorry, are you asking about the micro enterprise home kitchen ordinances? So this is a newish state provision. And it has very prescriptive, you can serve a certain number of meals a week, meals a day. And the county opts into it. And then if the county opts into it, it applies to cities. So there was a presentation at council by the county. The county is going around to all of the jurisdictions in Sonoma County and asking local jurisdictions to consider it and indicate support or concerns, and so that we can work together at a county level.
That's great. Thank you. Dwayne.
Carl in, or whether it's, to be delivered, to somewhere else to be served. But if it's coming to your place or driving, it certainly does.
So the question was we're still on micro enterprise home kitchens, about, impact of traffic. So, that program specifically does allow people to dine in. So they could act as small restaurants, if you will. They also could be delivery or pickup. It cannot be DoorDash. So it can't be a third party picking up the food and delivering it. But one of the concepts is it is kind of on a neighborhood scale. There's not something that says you can only come to this micro enterprise home kitchen if you live within 2 blocks and you come on foot or by bike. But I think part of the intention there is it does have things pop up that might support a neighborhood and you might know, you can't have signs. So you might know that the house 3 blocks away, serves delicious tamales. And so you make sure on Tuesdays you're picking up tamales and you're walking. It's not advertised and signage to bring someone from necessarily across town to come, but it doesn't prohibit it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Sharon, did you want to pick up something now, or?
So I wanted just to highlight that there are a number of areas of change in the framework, and I'd really encourage you to take a look at them. There are a number of options presented for each of the areas of change, and some options may appeal, some may not. What we had intended to do tonight was just show you how it's presented in the general plan, or not in the general plan, in the framework, so that you could get an idea of what you're going to be looking at. So the next slide. So this is a sample area of change for the downtown smart station area. And it's a greenfield development. There's nothing there today. But what we're proposing, or not, the base level is that there's no change to what's allowed today. But the proposal is that we actually go to this higher use, that might go to 4 stories on one side of the parcel or parcels, and 6 stories on another side. And then there's a more intense use that goes all the way to 8 stories. So these are the areas of change proposals that are being presented to the community to get feedback. And this is just one example. There are many of them in the framework. So I'd encourage you to take a look. And then I'd encourage you to go to one of the community input sessions. We have a limited time here tonight, so we're not gonna be able to get through all of the area of change, graphics and proposals. But if you take a look at them and go to the input sessions, which are 4 hours long, you'd be able to talk through what your concerns are and what your input is on any of those areas of change.
And just to follow up on that, the 2
It's
workshops will
next
be
slide.
Saturday. Actually, we can stay on that slide just for a moment.
Okay, but
The 2
I've got the.
Oh, there, you have them right there. But I want to go back that slide too
Okay.
before we leave.
Yeah.
Very good.
Drop in.
There,
Yeah.
it can be drop in.
Yep, you don't have to be there for the 4 hours, but it gives you time.
Be there for both.
And you don't have to be there for both. But the city really, planning really is, yeah. Planning really is looking for feedback on this. And as you can imagine with, I don't know how many areas of change there are, but there's 15 or more. That's not something that we'd get through here to receive all your inputs, but it's definitely something worth your time.
And if we could go back one slide. I'm not sure if everyone else is as familiar with the town, but just to make sure you know where those parcels are. Looking at the one on the left, the uppermost parcel up right is the 5 acres that Smart owns immediately adjoining their train station. The one that everybody, every newbie in town comes to me and goes, why is that sitting vacant next to a train station? Which is a really good question for another time. The parcel just below that, the one sort of trapezoidal shaped, is owned by a developer out of San Diego who does have an approval on it of what I thought was a pretty cool project, but the numbers don't work. They can't find financing for the construction costs. And then the lower left-hand parcel, it actually isn't a greenfield. That's the River Plaza Shopping Center. That's fine. So anyway, those are sort of key downtown parcels that really do need to be something, because it's a place where you can truly live without a car. You're right there by the bus transit mall. You can hop on the train. If I had a preferred place to live in the last 2 decades of my life, I'm assuming I have 2 more decades, I would like to live somewhere on those parcels. I think you had something you wanted to add?
I do. In terms of the way the areas of change are laid out. So this one only has the existing condition and one alternative. Many of the areas of change show 3 options: the base, what you can do today, what the current designation is, maybe a medium option, and a more intense option. And so, but on this one, the base, no change, there is 6 stories allowed on those parcels today under the current land use designation. So for instance, on this one is saying we can leave it at that. We could leave it at what it is, or we could look, given the location, given that it's right next to our train station, right next to our bus transfer station, we could look at bumping that up to 8 stories. These are not necessarily proposals. They are options. They are alternatives. They are to spark conversation with the community. We're looking for community input. No, that's too much. No, that's not enough. I like it just the way it is. So I just want to kind of phrase it that way, that there's one hasn't been selected. It's offering some suggestions based on what we've heard, based on the input we've received so far, and we're looking for input on that to move things forward.
Great, thank you.
Let's go for 2 slides now. Oh, didn't we have some other change slides in there? Oh, okay, they're part of the 15-minute, that's right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We're a little rough on the edges. That's me.
So I could actually get this started, but then I'll let you go ahead and lead it. This was So because the areas of change require robust conversation and community input, we don't want to focus on that tonight. But where we thought we could get some feedback, because it's one of the areas where we have a little bit of dissonance with the framework, is around 15-minute neighborhoods and a 15-minute center. And Dave already alluded to some of those issues around top-down planning and what do we need to do to actually let things, evolve organically. So this is where we'd like to point you to some of the vision that the framework includes, and that's in those handouts that you picked up or that I passed around. There's just the text that describes what we're thinking about in terms of 15-minute centers, or what the framework is thinking about in terms of those centers. And they are town centers, neighborhood centers, and then what was it? Activated parks and yes, exactly. So we wanted to get your input in general on the idea of the 15-minute centers and if we're headed in the right direction. And so what we're going to do is focus on a couple of 15-minute hubs to illustrate some of the challenges with the proposal as it sits today.
Next slide. Yeah.
I just said, but the point is, we're setting this up for the next 20 to 25 years. So let's give us the flexibility to evolve. And again, today's point, just because we vision it and set up the guardrails doesn't mean it happens, but we want to give ourselves the flexibility to have our neighborhoods evolve.
Casa Grande. Another piece of property or parcel I hear about frequently. There's a vacant piece of land just to the, I guess it would be southwest of the Casa Grande High School. Been vacant for forever, seems like. Been a number of development development proposals, none of which have come to fruition. So this was identified early on as a pretty obvious 15-minute center. I think it's a neighborhood center, not a town center. Okay. So right now that is the existing zoning, and I forget the orange means the mixed use zoning.
No, probably medium density residential.
Okay. Okay. And next slide.
Oh, unless it is, if it's, is it orange currently? Yeah, orange is usually medium density residential. So residential usually up to 18 units an acre.
Okay. Yeah. So there's three alternatives proposed here. Live work on the far left, alternative one. Then you go to the moderately dense neighborhood. And then alternative three gets truly into the 15-minute concept where it becomes a neighborhood center with mixed use, meaning some businesses in there, some walkable destinations. And just for reference, and sort of interesting how this works out, this is pretty much across the street from the Creekwood project that was so controversial last evening at the city council. It's fun how things work out in small cities. So Sharon, were you thinking that we wanted to poll the audience a little bit and see what they think?
What perceptions and generally around the idea of 15-minute centers where nothing exists today is, I don't know, how does that?
And if we can get most of this.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. No, we really just wanted to get some ideas from people, how they're receiving this, especially for centers that don't exist today. So Eric? I can give him this one.
We want the Zoom audience to hear your voice.
Again, I'm fairly new to this, but it struck me as odd because if I'm not mistaken, near Casa Grande, within a 5-minute walk, there's already a plaza that has like shopping and a whole bunch of parking, like single-story shopping and parking. So what I don't understand is this doesn't seem to accommodate all the 15-minute needs. Like, wouldn't you want to take a place that's already been built out and impacted and build that up more?
So a lot of them are that. A lot of them in the framework are existing commercial nodes, and it's maybe looking at how do we change that? How do we encourage and support and facilitate an evolution of this existing center to better meet the needs of the neighborhood. Some of them aren't. Some of them are areas where they are vacant now, and were identified as this might be a good area to have more activity. And that's why, the alternative one really is residential, but with some flexibility about live work. So some of that kind of low intensity commercial. That's why different options are shown on this one in particular, because it's not anything recognizable right now, other than right next to Casa Grande. But that's good. I mean, that's the kind of feedback we're looking for is this one not a good one? Is there other ones too close? Is there too much, not enough? So this is exactly the feedback that soliciting.
Yeah, what I would look forward here is, first of all, counting the number of houses within 15-minute walk. but I counted just randomly 2,000 houses within a circle around this. Whereas the one closer to Lakeville has half that number. And the question is, how many houses within walkable distance do you need in order to have a small shop, a small a grocery store? The shops, food shops could be populated by students right after school and by people in the evening. So there's possibility of walking all the way around here. So I think this would be an excellent place to put 3 stories of housing on the portion of it above both a restaurants and grocery store.
Thank you, Dwayne.
And Heather's taking notes.
So we have a note from, I'll stand here where I can get in front of the camera. We have a note from Zoom from someone who lives in the McKenna development and has wondered why there isn't something at this lot already mixed use. And she says the other places around there aren't worth visiting. So my question on any of these is this seems a little too specific to put in the plan because it seems like the sort of thing where you end up kind of trying to predict what the economics are going to support, especially in a time when retail is in tremendous shift. So is there a way to say whatever, either those 3 is fine?
I think that some of these zoning, like the mixed use zoning, is going to allow a wider range of uses. So if something is, if it remained medium density residential, it's going to allow residential. So part of the exercise too is having enough flexibility that the market can respond, but having the designations in place where we don't have obstacles to a great market response being able to happen at any location. So that's the balance often.
Hello, is there a minimum definition of what commercial activation to be a 15-minute neighborhood? Will a deli suffice as calling it a 15? And will this incorporate incentives to achieve what maybe the market doesn't initially go towards?
Is that for me?
Gotta be you.
Well, so almost working backwards, Mayor, one of the things we have talked with both the Planning Commission and the General Plan Advisory Committee about is it's not just enough to have the land use designation. We also have to be thinking about what are those other pieces, and that has been part of our conversation in terms of the areas that didn't happen the way the community thought they were going to happen from the last general plan. We have pockets of mixed use that haven't seen anything happen. Why? You know, what was there? Was it just because the market, we did have a little bit of a shift in the market after the 2008 adoption of the general plan, but so looking at, do we need the flexibility in the zoning, but do we also need other policies to help facilitate that and make that happen? I think the amount of commercial, I think that's probably going to be something that's going to evolve, right? A deli might be enough to pull people together in a residential neighborhood in the short term, you know, in a more immediate, but do we want to have that flexibility with the land use designation to allow that to grow as time passes, as the market responds, as the community shows demand, as we increase density in some areas. Some areas maybe don't have the density today to support a coffee shop or a deli, but if we are increasing some of our density allowances, maybe we get a little bit more density, and then that the market is created to support that commercial endeavor.
If I can add one thought to that. The other thing is, it's not just land use versus what the market wants. There are a lot of other drivers. And the one to me that's always been the most significant is how much we drive. You know, someday, as an overall public, we're going to say, hey, maybe forest fires and hurricanes and torrential rains are tied to the fact we're in our cars too much. We all know it's true, but trust me, the general public doesn't really accept that yet. If we get to a future world where through some mechanism, I don't want to speculate, 'cause I get in trouble when I do that people don't want to drive nearly as much. They see the problem. They are encouraged to be on foot. That's going to change what happens in the 15-minute cities. And because that is a possibility, given the amount of climate change we already have, we need to be prepared for that.
Just one more add to that, the activated parks mini centers that are called for, they're even a smaller, less commercialized version. They're creating places for people to gather. Maybe there's a food park, a food truck park or something like that where there is some small scale commercial activity, but it's that place where people come together. Maybe they're peppered through the neighborhood. They're, gathering spaces more than retail stores. So that's the kind of 3 levels: the town center, neighborhood center, and activated parks.
That's okay. Better for the folks watching.
Oh.
About the parks, having food trucks in particular, I really get a red flag on that because a park is a park and every food truck comes with a big old generator. And they're going to be there for how many hours, how often they're coming and going. And it's going to affect the entire park.
No, it's good feedback.
As well as the neighborhood that it's in. If people have to listen to generators all day, it's like your neighbor mowing their lawn for 7 hours on a Sunday. And if you've got 4 food trucks, that's a lot of noise. And and I don't know how much power a generator takes, but does that cancel out the amount of driving that people would have been doing? That's my red flag.
Thank you.
Anything else?
So as a resident who lives very close to Foundry Wharf, I can attest to the fact that one cafe, Aqua's Cafe, can change the quality of your life incredibly. The value of living in that neighborhood by that one cafe is almost unfathomable. So how do you, I see that the Foundry Wharf is on that list. How do you incentivize more into the Foundry Wharf to expand on what's there? There are some other, there's like a maker's spot there. There's an artist there. And I don't know, I don't go around the back. I don't know what's around there anymore. But how do you incentivize a place like Foundry Wharf, which has a good start, to build that out?
Sorry, Heather, I think that does go back to you. I mean, I've got some ideas, but you're closer to it.
Well, I think one thing is that neighborhood around Foundry Wharf, and even, along First Street, there are some really unique and eclectic uses. So you've got housing, you've got a restaurant, but you also have, light industrial. You have forklifts that are going up and down First Street, which is normally not what you see interacting, but it's also what gives it character. People either love it or hate it. When Three Twins ice cream went into that neighborhood and had their chiller, people hated it. But that was a really important, when we did the Central Petaluma specific plan back in 2003, that was a really important aspect. And there was, into that specific plan, they built in things like, if you're the resident moving into housing there, you're on notice that they're industrial users. So don't expect this to be quiet like it might be somewhere else. So there, some of those provisions in there to allow that interesting kind of interaction between the two. We are looking at some of the designations and I'm still committing all of this to memory. So it's either flex or maker space to kind of create those things that are gives it a little more flexibility to be what needs to happen. And we've done a lot of that in Petaluma when you're looking at, isn't there like a port or a port works, right? That's not the same as an Anheuser-Busch, right? But if you look at it in a lot of codes, alcoholic beverage, manufacturer is a use type. So we've done a lot to say, well, there's a difference if you're a small like artisan food and beverage manufacturer versus a standard. So trying to make sure there's some of those allowances in your general plan and in turn in your zoning code to allow those things. So I don't know if I answered any of your inquiry, but those are some of the things that came to top of mind.
Ready for the next slide?
Yes.
This is actually one I really wanted to have in here. Just to me, it's so intriguing. Every time I look at this, I'm surprised by it. Anybody recognize where that is? Okay. For the few who didn't, the block on the left is the bowling alley. Have you ever wondered why there is such a giant sea of asphalt in front of a bowling alley that's never used?
But it was
Go-
used.
Yeah, it's not that used. Those who came a year ago to the presentation by the Parking Reform Network may have heard, he called out our standard for parking for bowling alleys as one of the largest parking requirement he'd seen for bowling alleys, to the point that he wasn't even sure what we had done, how that ever came to be. It's lost to history. We can't blame anybody for it, but we have a large piece of land there that is really underused. Next to that, the gray blue is the Veterans Building. And of course, that is a well-respected community building, but it is also an old building. It's been taking a lot of maintenance. So the plan is saying, what happens if it doesn't remain? And then across the street, anybody recognize the name Bartna? Yeah, Kevin and I have talked about that side a lot. It was owned for years by an old gentleman, Bartna. His family has now sold it, but they insist the project, whatever project results there, be called Bartna. A couple of different developers have tried to make something work out. They've ended up walking away, but it is still a well-situated piece of property to do something fun, especially if something happens to the bowling alley site or the Veterans Center. There's three pieces there, all of which have different constraints on them, but they could come together to create a really cool neighborhood center on Petaluma Boulevard South. And for those of you who are newer to town, Petaluma Boulevard South up till 5 years ago was a 4-lane street compared to the current 2+1. 2+1 has made it a much more non-car friendly street, walking, biking. So we've created an opportunity for uses to grow along Petaluma Boulevard South that wasn't there before. And this is part of the opportunity to change the land designations to recognize that future possibility. So let's go one more slide and we'll look at some of the alternatives. Starting on the left, alternative one is a small neighborhood center. We don't touch Bartna, but we think if the Veterans Building, for whatever reason, goes away, we can do something with the bowling alley parking lot, something with the veteran site, small neighborhood center as part of the 15-minute neighborhood concept. Moving across, alternative two, we fold the Bartna property into it and look for a little higher density up to 4 stories. Now we're starting to create something that's really a significant place to visit, something that's going to stick in your mind when you enter Petaluma. And then going to the far right, now we're looking at 5-story buildings. That's really almost a mini town center, but you have a lot of residential in walkable distance from there. You've got some affordable housing on the other side of the river. You have the McNair project. You have Quarry Heights. There's that new Rovina affordable housing project not very far away. There's actually a lot of housing there that can walk to that site. So if we have, mixed use, residential above, stores below, it could change that part of town. So that is one of the decisions that will be made as this process continues. Eric, good, come on up.
I just wanted to reflect my earlier comment. I don't mean to sound negative, but my criticism earlier, I think, is because I'm not able to see, like, I'd like to make a choice, but I can't see how I would make the choice. Because I guess what I'm wondering is, what does 15 minutes mean in each of these pictures? Like, this is looks like a 2-minute city. I mean, I think everywhere in there I could walk in 2 minutes to the center. And then the other thing is, what do each of these activate? Because I can't see here what's around there. Like, I know some things that are around here, and other people probably know other things that are around there, but maybe that would make it too busy, but I'm just reflecting that maybe from a communication standpoint, it'd be nice to know, like, how does this really fit into the neighborhood and what are we activating?
Great input.
Following
thanks.
up on that a little bit, I live in that neighborhood and have said that, well, if it takes 8,000 people to support a grocery store, what does it take to get 8,000 people within walking distance of that section?
And we're probably not there yet, but the old rule about 8,000 people to support a grocery store is probably going to change. That would be a 50,000 square foot grocery store. And in the future, we're probably going to see a lot more 20,000 square foot grocery stores, because 50,000 square feet can't be supported by walkable distance. So if we get away from cars, the world changes. Marie.
This ties into something I was just thinking before you spoke, Dan, which is that how does this affect the existing commercial areas, shopping centers particularly? It seems like it has the potential to have the same effect as big boxes did on existing shopping centers or downtown even. Am I just totally off track about that, or is anybody exploring that? If you get everybody, I mean, I'm all for 15-minute cities, but I'd never thought about the possibility of how that could affect even downtown, maybe, I don't know.
So is the question about pulling customers away from existing? Yeah. So part of the general plan team, the consultant team that the city contracted with, does include 2 economists and 1 specifically on retail to look at some of those things, to look at how do we support and not have too much, how to not just pull it from one store to another. So that will be part of all the analysis and has been part of the discussion.
How do the giant supermarkets in town feel about 15-minute cities?
I'm guessing dubious. I mean, I'm sure from their eyes, the idea is dumb. It's never going to happen. But there's probably a lot of things over time that people thought wouldn't happen because they couldn't. Well, what's the old Upton Sinclair line? You can't convince a person to believe something if believing it would affect how they make their livelihood. So it keeps coming back.
On slides like this, it would be nice to see how transit improvements can help activate things, because, it's sort of in an isolation here. And then second on this, these are intensifying single-family neighborhoods, all the 15 proposals are. How do you sell intensifying to the single-family neighborhood?
I'll touch transit, then let somebody else touch intensifying neighborhoods. No, I mean, one thing that has disappointed me about the general plan process this far is that we were too slow to recognize the need for long-range transit planning also. We spent a lot of time on a bike ped plan and nothing on transit. And I was probably the leading proponent of a transit plan. We're finally making movement in that direction. I meet with the transit manager once a month to talk about where he stands on thoughts. And yes, Kevin's absolutely right. enough things are happening on Petaluma Boulevard South. We should institute a new bus system down there. We had one there before, years ago, the 5, and it just was never enough ridership to stay around. But the world is changing. We will have a plan at some point on where to go with transit. Now, selling it to neighborhoods, that's yours.
Well, a couple things. One, many of the areas of change came out of early conversations we had during the beginning of this process in with specific neighborhoods. And we were trying to talk about to people who live, work, play in specific neighborhoods. And we asked them questions about, what do you love and you hope never changes? And what's lacking, what's missing, what's a spot that every time you go there, you're frustrated because the signal's always broken, or you can't buy organic eggs, or whatever it is. So many of these areas, actually, that was one of the places these areas came from. They were areas that were identified through some of those discussions as, this is an area I'd like to see change in my neighborhood. So that's one thing. We have also heard from people that they don't want to have to get in their car and leave their neighborhood to get some of their basic needs. And that's a concern with the way the city is currently designated and zoned is residential, single family residential is here, and over here you have your commercial. And so you have to leave your neighborhood to go to your commercial. So some of this is also in response to that. It's in response to the effort that the SSTAT, which is the Sustainable Design Assistance Team, came to Petaluma 2 years ago or so. And these 15-minute neighborhoods was part of all of the outreach they did, walking around the city, identifying these areas. So this is not something totally new in the general plan. This is trying to build off of that effort. So those are a couple things. And then the other thing I would say is the intensity of change is a question that I think really plays into that, because these neighbors in this area might say, I would love, small neighborhood center, but I absolutely do not want 5 stories in this corner in my neighborhood. And so that will be good input too. So we're taking what we've heard so far to identify the areas to build off of the 15-minute city concept. And then we're providing some options that we're hoping we're going to get input on to how significant of a change does that neighborhood want to see.
On 2 issues. One, I don't know where the people who live just off the freeway southwest of Petaluma, where they go to shop, but I don't imagine they drive downtown. So that was relevant to a question that we're going to take away from downtown. I don't know. It'd be interesting to know where they go to shop. What I wanted to talk about though was the question as to what do the big shopping markets think of our 15-minute neighborhoods. And I would suggest we look at the Eli Corona general plan, which was for 3,000 homes originally. And the people who were planning for that area didn't want a big shopping center. And somebody said that the Safeway liked 10 acres or more in order to have a justifiable shopping center. So the people asked deliberately for less than 10 acres. And because that Safeway wouldn't go in there. And so I assume at this point, Safeway has downgraded the size of markets that they're willing to, walkable markets they're willing to actually deal with. I'm not objecting to Safeway, but it's just an interesting coincidence that here they are in this small shopping center now.
Yeah, I don't quite understand process-wise how looking at this and then hearing, this woman talking about food trucks and parks, and Lisa Marie talking about aquas. how is this gonna somehow get mushed into something that tells us where we're going? I look at this, for example, this is my neighborhood and I'm thinking, well, number one, why can't we, I would think probably the bowling alley would love to be able to reduce their parking lot and have some other uses in there. So let's just do that. And I mean, are we supposed to decide between this when there's no idea of that that this, the veterans building may be there just like that for 50 years. So I'm just not quite sure how our, down home ideas of what we want to see fits into the general plan.
You probably have some thoughts there. If I could just add one. Before I was here this evening, I was at another meeting, political strategizing, and the candidate in question, I won't mention names, made a comment that it's always better to have a policy in place before you have a proposal. That if you get the proposal first and then try to modify the policy to fit, it's a lot more controversial. So yes, again, I'm not making specific points, just saying, but it's true. I mean, and sometimes that means you're putting a policy in place that will never happen because some of the other antecedent conditions, such as the veterans building not being repairable anymore, won't happen. But I think that's just part of planning, is to get policy out in front in a direction you want to go.
I would agree with you, and wanting to make sure that we have a vision through our general plan so that when something does come in, we've thought about these areas. We have a sense. We know we don't want 5 stories there. We want to keep it at 2 to 3 stories, or we really think this would be a great area for, a full town center up to 5 stories and with lots of options. And you're right. Maybe nothing happens with the veterans building. Maybe we're here next time talking about another general plan update and it's still a veterans building, and that definitely happens. But the thinking is to have a vision and think about it before you either have, a new proposal in front of you that you're making kind of a change focused just on one area, or you have a really great idea that walks away because there were too many challenges to doing something. So that's something. In terms of all the comments, we're collecting all the comments. We're, thinking about them. So, maybe the comment about food trucks, maybe we hear 80 others that said, we want food trucks, we want food trucks. And so maybe then we're thinking, okay, well, a lot of people wanted food trucks, but there was a real comment that was brought up about noise impacts from food trucks. So let's make sure we have a policy that we're going to be developing certain performance standards for food trucks in proximity to parks. I'm kind of going off the cuff, but just trying to talk about the way those different things come together. So ideally what we want is we want everybody to see themselves in the general plan. We want everybody to feel like I had an opportunity to give my opinion, to be involved at the level and in the way I wanted to be involved, and what is proposed in my neighborhood. I like it. I have ownership of it. I think this is the right vision for our community.
Ready to go on to the next slide, or do you have something? Go for it.
I wanted to make one comment in response to Mary, and it goes back to what you had said earlier, Dave. The general plan, as much as we'd like to think of it as a plan of something that we're actually going to do, it is just establishing the guardrails, and it's up to, private entities, some public contribution, but I mean, we really don't have control over every aspect of how it plays out. But we can set up the guardrails so that we get what we want in the end, when it comes up. So that was one thing I'd like to say. But the other thing I wanted to just make us aware of the time. I think we need to wind it down. But I wanted to encourage everyone to take a look at the general plan, the framework is very dense. You can find it at planpetaluma.org, right? And there are visual guides like this one. I love Eric's comment about how do I see this in situ, but you can actually drop a, there are apps you can use to, to draw a line around a map on Google and see what the area of impact for a 15-minute neighborhood, say it's 3/4 of a mile. But I'd encourage you to take a look at those, come to one of the planning open houses to provide your feedback. But look in advance because there's a lot to absorb. And, there are areas of change beyond the 15-minute neighborhoods that we've talked about that are also really interesting. What are we doing with some of our biggest corridors in town? And what are we doing to preserve open space for the river and for future flood states? So there's a lot of good stuff to take a look at. And the other comment I would like to make is that we've seen a lot of the frameworks come through for different elements that will, for different topics that will end up being elements in the general plan. This is, I think, one of the most solid. It's really meaty and it's impacts so much of what we do. And I was very impressed with how this pulled together. I mean, nothing's been decided, but it presents coherent goals and policies and specific actions that can get us there. So I really encourage everyone to, there's going to be maybe rain tomorrow. And then you can you can take some time out and do a little light reading of your 128-page document. So, but seriously, I hope we've given you enough of an introduction that you can start to page through and see some of the graphics and have enough to work with to go into one of the open houses.
So are you thinking we want to call it quits here?
I think we
It's
do.
long enough?
Because we got yeah, I think we need to.
You're seeing some glassy-eyed looks out there?
Yeah, well, and feel free to take the handouts. That's just an excerpt of a few highlighted areas that were targeted as potential 15-minute centers. There are some shopping centers that we're looking at redoing. So there's a lot to take a look at.
Are there any final questions? How about on Zoom? Then we are done. Thank you for being here.